Welcome to ACN's Red Wednesday event in Scotland. This event was recorded on the evening of the 25th of November, but unfortunately due to technical difficulties, only part of the event was recorded. And this means that our fantastic host, John Mason MSP's introduction is not included, but you will hear from him later on in the recording. John started with an apology from Minister Jenny Gilruth that she was unable to attend tonight, and shared why he had such an interest in religious freedom himself. John, used to live in Nepal, where he firsthand experienced the lack of freedom to practice his chosen religion, and therefore it instilled in him that need for religious freedom. John has been a fantastic and constant support to ACN, and I would like to thank him for that. I would also like to welcome our guest speakers for this evening: John Pontifex, ACN's Head of Press and Media in the UK, Jamie Kerr, who's a lawyer and a specialist in immigration law, Neville Kirk-Smith, who is ACN's National Director for the UK, and Claire Sweeney, our own Schools and Events Coordinator in Scotland. And Claire, you'll hear from Claire at the end, towards the end of our programme. I myself, I'm Lorraine McMahon, and I'm Head of Operations in Scotland for ACN. The event on the 25th, John Mason read out this letter. The letter is in reply to our invite to ask Jenny Gilruth, the Minister of Europe and International Development in Scotland, to come and speak at our event. In reply, Jenny has sent us a letter which says, "Dear Lorraine, thank you for your invitation to the ACN Red Wednesday digital event at 7:30 on the 25th of November. Unfortunately, due to existing commitments, I cannot attend on this occasion. However, I wish you a successful event. The Scottish Government has a long-standing commitment to freedom of religion or belief. I believe Scotland's diversity is our strength and value the contribution of diverse faith communities. Scotland's faith communities play a significant role in Scotland and abroad, supporting many of our most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. We also promote interfaith dialogue to strengthen and enhance connections across communities to lower barriers, eliminate fear, and increase understanding. People of all faiths and none must be supported to follow their way of life without fear of discrimination. As you will be aware, matters of foreign affairs are reserved to Westminster and delivered through the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, known as FCDO. We have regularly raised issues of freedom of religion or belief and persecution of religious minorities abroad with FCDO officials. We welcome the recommendations produced by the Bishop of Truro independent review of persecution of Christians and freedom of religion or belief globally. The UK Government has assured us that they continue to implement these recommendations. The FCDO is also committed to using its influential voice to raise freedom of religion, belief at the United Nations, and urging the international community to work together. We welcome this work to ensure that people of all faiths and none are supported to live their lives without fear or discrimination. Yours sincerely, Jenny Gilruth." Christians and other people of faith are still being persecuted and suffering religious discrimination. Today, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, tonight's event is held virtually, but although we can't all see one another, we know that we're here together as a community to stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters around the world. Red Wednesday is an initiative of Aid to the Church in Need. We're a Catholic-based charity, and our mission is to support Christians wherever they are persecuted, oppressed, or in pastoral need. In many countries around the world on Red Wednesday, cathedrals, public buildings, churches are lighting up red to symbolise the blood spilled by the innocent and to make a stand for religious freedom. Red Wednesday is a day to join together and raise a strong voice in support of the persecuted who are unable to speak freely and who look to us to speak on their behalf. Pope Francis said, "Religious freedom does not include using religion to justify discrimination or intolerance. Rather," he said, "that religious freedom and those who practice a religion in its pure and good form only seeks to increase tolerance and connection among people, even when they are different." Today, on Red Wednesday 2020, ACN shares with you 4 case studies within the report Set Your Captives Free, with a focus on Myra Shabazz. Today, ACN asks you to stand with us in support of these people. Today and always, ACN asks you not to close your eyes to persecution. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening and you find our talks to be very informative. Thank you.
I'd like to begin with a quotation, if I may. It is this: "Today, as you read this, there are countless numbers of people who are unjustly detained. Like me, their offence is the faith they refuse to renounce." Well, these are the words of Asia Bibi, the Christian woman from Pakistan who hit the headlines and who was on death row for a crime she did not commit. It is Asia Bibi, now enjoying a new life in a new country, who has written the foreword for ACN's new report, which we are launching today, Set Your Captives Free, a report on Christians unjustly detained for their faith.
Myra Shabazz was only 14 when she was abducted at gunpoint from near her home. The kidnapping took place in broad daylight in April 2020 during the middle of Pakistan's coronavirus lockdown. Her abductor abused her, made her renounce her Christian faith, and forced her into a sham marriage. After legal battles to free her saw her repeatedly sent back to her captor, she finally managed to escape in the middle of the night, months after being seized. Today, she and her family live in hiding after Myra's captor threatened to kill them all. Leah Sharibu was also just 14 when Boko Haram seized her and more than 100 of her classmates from their school in Dapchi, northern Nigeria. The other girls were released, but when Leah refused to renounce her Christian faith as the price of her freedom, Boko Haram refused to let her go. That was more than 2 years ago, and Leah is still in captivity, having been forced to marry a Boko Haram fighter. And the problem of women being kidnapped by non-state actors is not the only issue highlighted by Aid to the Church in Need's Set Your Captives Free report. There is a disturbing trend of states unjustly detaining members of faith minorities. Authorities have arrested members of these groups without charge, incarcerated them at secret locations, or placed them under house arrest. One such example of this is the case of Chinese Bishop James Su Jimin, who, despite never having been formally tried or officially sentenced, has been imprisoned for almost a quarter of a century. A push by Beijing in July 2020 to get someone else recognised as Bishop of Bodang led to fears that Bishop James might be dead. This sparked renewed interest in the case, including a hearing by members of the United States House of Representatives. Chinese officials will not confirm whether or not Bishop James is still alive. Nor is the arbitrary detention of faith leaders confined to China. Patriarch Antonius of the Eritrean Orthodox Church has been under house arrest since 2007, but again, no formal charges have been made. His detention came after he refused government demands that he excommunicate 3,000 members of his church, and also made repeated criticism of the state's imprisonment of Christians. These cases are just the tip of the iceberg, and there are countless others where people have been unjustly detained because of their faith. A number of these are briefly described in ACN's Set Your Captives Free report. The silent suffering of victims and the anguish of friends and family explain why unjust detention has become the tool of choice for oppressors. It is because of this that Aid to the Church in Need is highlighting these egregious human rights violations and calling on everyone to do everything they can to set them free.
The report is unlike anything ACN has put together before now. For the first time, we tell the story of individuals, men, women, young and old, all of them, who are being denied their freedom. Shortly, we will show a video which provides a summary of the report's findings. But before we go on to that, let me first set the context of the report. Unjust detention emerges as one of the most prevalent, enduring, and serious forms of persecution, according to ACN research. Some reports say that in the 50 or so worst offending countries, more than 300 Christians are unjustly detained every month. And almost every day at Aid to the Church in Need, we receive reports of Christians being incarcerated, kidnapped, or imprisoned without charge. Only yesterday, we heard reports of a priest, Father Matthew Dajo, who's from the Catholic Archdiocese of Abuja. So it's particularly good that we have with us today Archbishop Ignatius Kagama, who's recently taken up the position of Archbishop of Abuja. And this particular priest was kidnapped, we understand, on Sunday night by armed men who targeted him in his parish. The nature of unjust detention is such that much of it goes on unrecorded. Fear of reprisal so often means families and other loved ones shy away from publicizing the sudden disappearance or arrest of innocent Christians. The other thing to say about why the issue of unjust detention of Christians is hidden is that very often, of course, it takes a long time for the stories of unjust detention of Christians to fully emerge. And sometimes we'll never hear exactly what has happened to them.
In the comfort of our own homes. It makes me recall how different things were this time last year, and looking at the faces attending. Many of us attended last year's Red Wednesday event in the Parliament in person. We had a cup of coffee, we mingled over a bite to eat, we had the opportunity to chat to each other and get a look about the Parliament, and it's striking what a dramatic change we can have in the space of a very short time. Because I think by gathering this evening online, as we do, we've got this dreadful pandemic around us, we've got all the restrictions that come with it. I think that, despite being very difficult, gives us a better insight into the life of the persecuted church. And I think with what we're going through at the moment, we get a better insight, or we can better understand this year than we could last year, the plight of the persecuted church. I think last year it was more difficult for us to grasp the realities of faith groups, of churches in some countries. we may be better at understanding countries where there is no government, but very hard for us to understand the plight of the church in countries which have government or some form of government in the way that John has described at least two of the countries. And it's hard for us to understand the church in those countries because we don't have those problems here in the modern West. So it's a bit abstract for us to usually try and understand it. And I think it's abstract because we in Scotland, I think, have lost the collective historical memory that we were once the persecuted church. And I think we forget that, we've forgotten that. But the lives of people like St. John Ogilvie are a testament to that. So how do we think about or understand the persecuted church in abstraction here? And I think, well, with the pandemic changing so many aspects of our life, some for the better, some for the worse, I think we should reflect on how this dreadful virus can help us better understand those persecuted because of their faith. And we can perhaps ponder whether in some very small way, albeit a very, very small way, what we're going through at the moment here in our own society can give us a very narrow glimpse into societies where things like religious worship is very strictly controlled by authoritarian regimes like in Eritrea, and John also mentioned China. And in these countries, the report touches upon how where one worships, how one worships, who one worships, how many people come together to worship, whether they worship in an approved institution or not, is all very tightly controlled. And I think what we see in these countries is that the Caesars of the world render more and more unto themselves in areas that are always properly understood not to belong to Caesar, to use that quote. And if we think of last year in the gathering, it was very hard for us to identify with the plight of the church in Eritrea or the Eritrean Christians in the scenarios that John had touched. And I wonder, in the scenario of the virus, where many of us are confined to our homes for health reasons or for one reason or another, we're used to our lives changing, whether that helps us imagine better the plight of the church. And there are aspects of it that we will thankfully never understand: the beatings, the kidnappings, the arbitrary detentions and the like, and we should be grateful for that. So as I was preparing for the event and wondering what I could be saying tonight, I just happened, being out in a second-hand bookshop last month in Glasgow, to pick up a book called The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I've been reading that as I was turning my thoughts to this. And reading that book, it struck me how relevant that story is to what we're discussing tonight. For those of you who don't know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian and a Lutheran pastor who in the 1930s and 1940s repeatedly spoke out in Germany against the horrors of what was happening there, including things like speaking out vocally against the euthanasia program, speaking out against the persecution of the Jews. And because he was so outspoken, he lost his job at the university teaching. And he left Germany to go to America. He lived in the US for a bit and spent time in London as well. But in 1939, he returned back home to Germany, and he'd done so knowing the full horrors that potentially awaited him there. And he continued speaking out, was arrested and ultimately hanged in Germany in 1945. And I think it was only days before he was hanged, days before the camp he was in was was liberated. And so I've been reading this and thought, well, actually, that topic or that story is actually so relevant to what we are speaking about tonight. And I think the reason for that is because he believed in faith having a place in the world. And he believed in what he called the visible church, a church that is visible in the world. And it struck me how it would have been so easy for him to stay in the United States. But instead he chose to return home to martyrdom, I suppose, in Germany, and done that willingly. And people say that, well, he done that because he knew that for Christian civilization to survive in Europe, he had to return home and bear witness in the midst of the chaos that was happening there. And he performed the highest task that I suppose a Christian can undertake. And he said that the essence of discipleship means, and these are his words, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. And it struck me that the cases that John has highlighted tonight remind us how heroic Christians, people are doing the same today as Bonhoeffer done in the 40s. They are standing visible in their countries when their own governments want to silence them and hide them away and even eradicate them. And the hope of these governments is that we here ignore them. We do nothing, we don't act, and we leave them invisible. And that's why these oppressive governments hide people away in medieval prisons. They use the age-old dungeon fire and sword. But despite all that, still those Christians remain visible, and so many people coming together tonight is a real testament to that. And I think what Red Wednesday does is remind us that we have a duty. Each and every one of us here tonight has a duty to shine a light onto what is happening and shine a light onto the persecution of Christians around the world. And I think we need to act to make sure that the persecuted church is a visible church, and make sure that it's a visible church here in the West and in Scotland and the UK where we are. And we need the plight of people like Patriarch Antonius and his followers in Eritrea to be visible to our politicians, our policymakers, and our people of influence here in Scotland and in the UK. And I think by doing that, we can bring light to darkness, and we can do our own part to save Christian civilization in the ancient cradles where it began, I suppose. And I think that's another thing that struck me, was that we should be very clear that in places like Eritrea, far away places like Eritrea, that's where Christian civilization started and took hold. And it was there long before it was here. And I think that's really easy for us to forget. And I think I'm right in saying that Eritrea has been a Christian country since the 4th century. And when we put that in context, that predates the origins of Islam and the spread of Islam, which I think came in the 7th century. And I suppose we could go as far as to say that Eritrea, where the Patriarch is detained, was devoutly Christian, whilst these islands here and most of Northern Europe was pagan. So I think that's a really important aspect, that there is a real attempt to wipe out Christianity in places where it has been for so long, for thousands of years. And I think just as Bonhoeffer in Germany said that he was fighting for Christian civilization to survive in Europe, so too we can say that this very elderly patriarch, who thinks in his 90s, fights for all of Christian civilization today by simply refusing to become invisible. And I think the longer we can keep him and the others like him, the others that John have mentioned, visible, I think the better chance that Christian civilization has of surviving, because we should be in no doubt, and the reports from ACN remind us of this, is that Christianity has been driven very deliberately from the places around the world where it has started, and it has been for a very long time, as well as other countries where it has more recently taken root. And I think to avoid that, that's where our advocacy becomes important, and the advocacy of all of us, of each person here tonight. And I think on that front, I would say that we must support organisations like Aid to the Church in Need, because they are actively working for us and on our behalf in a very direct manner with those who are in most need, and in most need of our mercy and our aid, and as well as the very hands-on work that the ACN teams do in those countries. There's also great importance to be given to their policy work that they do with government and with politicians and policymakers here in the UK. And I think that has enormous value, and we have to do everything we can to support it, because I think the stories that John has spoken about tonight and that appear in the report are truly shocking. They shock us, these stories, and in good conscience we can't ignore them, and that's why we need to tell people these stories, and we have to tell our friends and our families, and we have to share these stories of forced conversions, unlawful detentions, and forced disappearances. And I think as a practical thing, John spoke about writing. We can all write to our politicians, and I can see Claire Adamson, my own politician and Motherwell Wisher here, my own MSP here, but we can write to our politicians, and why don't we do that? Why don't each of us undertake to write to our local member of parliament? Because if each of us were to write to our local member of parliament about the plight of the persecuted church, then they would listen. And as a lawyer dealing with immigration and asylum law cases, I know that this strategy works, and we will often read in the media about a particular case which for one reason or another strikes a chord with a particular group in society. And what we see is people organising, people getting together, writing letters, signing petitions, organising events, emailing their members of parliament. The politicians notice, the politicians will take up the mantle, and then will lobby the decision makers. In my own field of law, I know that that can have a very positive impact. And I think we should not think that what happens in Eritrea or China or Nigeria or elsewhere is too far away for us to do anything about. It's not, because we know that we cannot be like Bonhoeffer, who went back to his country to make a stand amidst the chaos. We're not asked to do that, thankfully, and we don't need to do that. And I suppose if we're honest, neither would we want to do that, many of us. But what we can do is lots of other things. There's lots for us to do. We can fundraise, we can campaign, and we can advocate here from Scotland to make sure that that persecuted church remains a visible church. And just coming to the end, I want to say that by making the persecuted church the visible church here in Scotland, we do bring light to darkness. Because thinking of Eritrea, 2,000 years of Christian civilization there cannot be locked away in a dark prison cell without acting, without us doing anything. We can't allow them to lock away 2,000 years of Christian civilization without doing anything. So I think tonight we should leave in a hopeful mood, knowing that by very small actions here, we can help Patriarch Antonius and others like him and the entire persecuted church, because these regimes have hidden Christians away, hidden them away in darkness, and are trying to make them invisible. But so we need to push for their release, and we need to remind the world that there is indeed a role for faith in the world and the four corners of the globe. And we need to remind the Caesars of the world that we will not become invisible and will not allow the persecuted church or the faces that we've chosen to represent it in the report to be invisible. Because I think if they are the visible church, then we should make sure, we here as a visible church should make sure we do everything that we can to make them remain, as Bonhoeffer said, the visible church. So I think there's something really important there that we can do this evening. As a lawyer, my role focuses on advocacy. We don't need to be highly skilled advocates in the highest courts, not that I'm one of them, to advocate for people. We can get to our computer, we can type an email, or even get a pen and paper and write a letter to the MP. And if enough of us do it, then it makes a difference. So that's my message tonight, that one, we take away a positive action, as John said, to write one letter, and that's how we help the persecuted church from where we are, and that's how we help them remain visible, and that's how we play our part and show solidarity.
Thanks, Jamie, very much indeed. And I think I would have to say you finished on a very positive note there about the things that we can do. I think I was watching one of the videos, and I think it was Bishop John Keenan who's with us tonight, who said whenever he types ACN, he gets CAN on his computer, which I've found that problem as well. But he made the very good point, if you've seen the video, that ACN, we can do things. So I think that's one of our themes tonight, is that we can do things. So one or two people have been typing in questions, including myself. So I'm going to hand over now to Neville Kirk-Smith, and they didn't give me a big long bit about you, so I haven't anything to say about you other than you are what's your title is it head of
don't worry, National Director of AT.
National Director, sorry, I've just
been around for so long. Most of you have put up with me, including you, John, for many years. So you don't want to know anything about me. We've got some really good questions, and I'd like to thank you all, and thanks for letting me join. And a few Scottish roots there in my background as well. A Kirk with a funny spelling, as I always say, but there we are. It's hidden away somewhere. And it's lovely to see so many friends, Bishop John Keenan, Bishop Joe Toll, and to Jamie and Kitty and Ronnie, and so many of you I've got to know over the years as well. And I think we had a few others who've come and gone who were with us earlier on. Ronnie's there, I can see he has to say. So it's great. And I'll say a few words afterwards, but we've had some questions. I had some questions which we'd had sent in beforehand, but I've got so many questions now that there's no need to refer to those. And I'm going to give Jamie a little rest first of all. And John, you got the ball rolling, I think, with John Mason, with asking John Pontifex, can you explain more about the situation in Nigeria? The South has a lot of Christians, I think. John, would you like to field that?
Yes, I can. I went to Nigeria in 2013, and but I didn't go to the South, which, as our questioner rightly says, is dominated by Christians, has a very clear Christian majority. But the concerns with regard to persecution of Christians and the specific issue of unjust detention of Christians concerns two regions: the north, which is really around Maiduguri and through to Yola in the east, the northeast, stretching over to Malumfashi over in the northwest, and then that area being mostly a sort of desert area. And then further south, you've got the Middle Belt, which has become the focal point of a lot of conflict. And one of the things that when we were doing the Bishop of Truro review into the extent to which the UK Foreign and Commonwealth was providing support for persecuted Christians, one of the themes that emerged from that report which came out last year, which ACN was heavily involved in terms of providing research, was that the issues to do with persecution are very complex. That we cannot exclude the factors of environment, nor indeed ethnicity, nor indeed the search for natural resources. But what does come out from the report, and I do urge people to read it, is the extent to which persecution of a religious nature is very strongly present. And we heard just earlier this evening from Archbishop Ignatius Kaigama, a great friend of ours who I met in Jos and who is now Archbishop of Abuja, that the essential to the issue is in many ways the two predominant communities, namely the Christians and the Muslims, are neck and neck in terms of numbers, and in many ways the struggle for supremacy is to do with them in many cases vying for who is the most numerous. But it is clear that in the midst of all these various issues is the undeniable extent to which Christians are being targeted. I very vividly remember standing in St. Rita's Church in Kaduna with victims of a blast which took place just at the communion of a Sunday Mass in October 2012, and a bomb went off and blinded one man, John Abor, and maimed many others. And it was clear from the timing of the attack, where it took place, when it took place, that it was a direct targeting of Christians. And this has been underlined in our research again and again. And there is an urgent need for the government, especially the regional authorities in the north, to step up the security to ensure that due protection is provided for all groups, including minority ones. And as Archbishop Kaigama made clear in his speech earlier this evening at the Westminster parliamentary event that we at ACN held, part of essential to this problem is the rise of unjust detention, abduction, and even in his own diocese, Archbishop Kaigama's own diocese, on Sunday, he had a priest, Father Matthew, who was abducted. So this couldn't be more pressing, and it's absolutely essential that action be taken to stop this impunity and this violence going on.
Thanks very much, John. I think there's a couple of questions which we might combine here, I think from Francis and Ronnie, and really about ACN working with other organisations. And I'll come to you in a minute, John, but it says Amnesty and Human Rights Watch to mobilise all people care about human rights, start campaigning. I mean, the interesting thing for us is we've been involved very much with the FORB, Freedom of Religion and Belief campaigns, and I'm on the steering committee of the UK FORB Forum, which was set up under the Bishop of Truro after his report for the Foreign Secretary. And indeed, the Bishop of Truro joined us earlier. And just to say to you, any of you, I put it on the messenger app there or the chat, anyone who's trying to join us from Westminster earlier, the video should go out to those who signed on later on, and you'll hear the Bishop of Truro for a couple of minutes there. And he specifically wanted to be there following Raymond Chisti MP, the former representative of the Prime Minister on the freedom of religion and belief. And we're involved in that and cooperate with others on the FORB Forum, the All-Party Parliamentary Group in Westminster, and indeed, you know, in Scotland, we're involved with so many committees and with others. And I can think of one example, and John could comment on that. For instance, on Iraq, we're joining with a number of charities. I think we're probably the biggest one involved with Mosaic. And also we work with CSW, and we talk to Open Doors. But in other cases, we've also been speaking, and John's been invited to speak for the Ahmadiyas. We've had Jewish speakers, delighted to have them involved at events. And I think we've got much more of a coherent approach now. And the pressure is beginning to bear, I think, at Westminster. John would say more, but the last figure I had for the petition on Mara we'll come back to later on, but the latest figure I had earlier this evening was we've got 11,306 people who've signed the petition for Mara Shabazz now. And that's going to put pressure on, this is a letter to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and it's on our website, and I know Claire will be talking about that later on. And the more people who sign that, the better, because we have to act now. So I think we do work more together. There, I don't want to go into the details now. There are probably some of these other charities we'd like to work closely with, but we might have some questions about some of the emphasis within them, the emphases, I should say, within them as well. Their understanding of human rights might differ, but let's find what we can do in common, which is much greater. What unites us is much greater than what divides us. John, would you like to comment on that, working with other organisations for campaigning as well?
Yes. We have, in answer to the question, we have shared a platform at an event involving Amnesty International. But as Neville rightly says, we have to be careful who we partner with. But we nonetheless want to see ways in which we can cooperate. And it's often said to us by our benefactors at events and in meetings and in letters. They call on us again and again to find common cause. And the Westminster Parliament, for example, about 8 years ago, Neville made the strategic decision for Aid to the Church in Need UK to be a stakeholder with the all-party parliamentary working group for freedom of religion or belief. And that was what set the ball rolling, to do with a joined-up approach to recognise that where one faith group suffer, it's more certain that other faith groups suffer. And that's why we're stronger together and we need each other. We're not in any way indicating that there should be special pleading. We are indicating that Christians are the most widely persecuted group. We are, the research from Pew Research Centre only last week further emphasised the geographical spread of persecution. But frequently that persecution involves many other faith groups, and we need to work together, be it with the Ahmadis, with the Baha'is, with the Yazidis in Iraq, and other faith groups, to find common cause to fight this evil of persecution.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to the view. Just to say, perhaps I could turn now to Jamie, because we had a few questions, Jamie. Now we're giving you a rest about. Well, thank you for the excellent input. Understanding immigration is a reserved matter. What influence, and this links with the Scottish government, what influence could Scottish government exert with the UK government, particularly in cases where Scottish communities might be willing to sponsor persecuted Christians, such as Mara Shabazz? And additionally, how can we use the law and courts in these countries to challenge the governments? Do most of them claim to uphold freedom of religion? So maybe I can give those two to you, Jamie, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I think that obviously immigration and asylum policy is reserved to the Westminster government, but we see time and time again the ability that the Scottish government has to engage and change UK immigration policy. And I suppose one example where we saw that very early on is in relation to detention of children in Scotland. And I think the one thing that the Scottish government has is a line of communication to the UK government. So I still think it's, whilst our primary point of lobbying, as it were, should be our members of Parliament because it's a reserved issue, I think there's still a role for the Scottish government to play when it comes to immigration and asylum, because they have an interest in the topic. And I suppose in policy terms, it's maybe easier to influence things here in Scotland. It's easier to get access to high level decision makers in Scotland than it is in London. And I suppose people would say that across the board in different policy areas. So I think that there is a role for the Scottish government to play. or has a role to play there.
Thank you very much. And just a interesting follow-up, very much on the spot on this one, from Adam Mackay, with today's announcement from the UK government, the foreign aid budget will be cut, I think it's sort of 0.7% to 0.5%. How does that impact on non-government organisations such as ACN's ability to affect change and bring about positive outcomes abroad? I don't know if John Pontifex wants to start this. I can obviously add something to that, John.
Yes, the position of Aid to the Church in Need is to very much welcome the UK government's commitment to providing overseas aid. The challenge that we found, and Neville will echo this from his own trips, I would say this specifically in connection with Iraq and with Lebanon, that in our visits to the countries, our visits to displacement camps, to refugee camps, the question has been raised again and again, is the aid getting through to the people who need it? And that question, from our experience, has not been always adequately answered. I remember vividly going to one refugee camp in Zakhle in eastern Lebanon, close to the border with Syria. And we went to this UN camp, and I asked the coordinator of the camp, are there any Christians to be found here? And the answer came, well, there would be, but they have to abide by Muslim customs. When I asked what that meant, it meant that they had to essentially follow the requirements of Sharia law. And for that reason, Aid to the Church in Need was left to pick up the pieces to provide for the Christian families who weren't able to go to these camps, didn't feel safe in these camps, and had to make do with living in the basement of people's houses in the local vicinity. So our experience is to say that it's absolutely vital, the work of Aid to the Church in Need, because it reaches the parts that sometimes overseas aid doesn't reach. And we're so grateful to our benefactors. We would echo the support from Archbishop Darwish in Zakhle, of Archbishop Warda in Erbil, Iraq, and many, many others who feel that if it weren't for Aid to the Church in Need helping, these people would have no one, really no one to turn to. And it is very humbling when you see that work in action, as I, for one, have been privileged to see.
Thanks, John. I'm looking. I see John Mason beginning to move that. I think, how many more minutes on questions do we have before my talk? A couple of minutes. Couple of minutes. Just to echo that, and we have been told, in fact, Archbishop Kai Garma once gave a very powerful talk in Parliament. He said, I've never seen any of this aid given by the British government. And the visibility of the British aid, I think, is another question. We don't want to get into a discussion about the merger, DFID and the Foreign Office, but certainly when I was in northern Iraq and I was told the British had helped with the hospital in Karakosh, nobody in Karakosh near Mosul knew anything about British aid. And it was we were helping restore the convents and the homes, the main charity helping. So the effectiveness of some of the aid would be questioned. I hope the aid can be effective. It is terrible if people who suffer because of a political decision here to give more on, I don't know, in arms, means that there's less help there going to the poorest of the poor. But it's the effectiveness of aid that I think has to really be asked. And just to emphasize, ACN doesn't receive any government money. It's we just refuse to accept it, because we know even if there aren't strings attached, there will be strings attached somewhere in the background. We have set up bodies such as the body in northern Iraq, the Nineveh Reconstruction Committee, and that enabled other charities to work with them, who did take money in to help different communities. But we think it's appropriate as a Catholic charity that we stick to this. We get gift aid, that's it. But it's a sensitive question, I know, and I'm sure the discussions will go on. And I'd just like to say one piece of encouragement that perhaps then come to my brief thank you, John, if I'm looking at John Mason, and I haven't got it in my talk, that it's extraordinary in this year. I've had the figures just through from ACN International and ACN UK. We've had to make some tough decisions here this year, very difficult decisions concerning staff, volunteers, and the way we operate. But our benefactors are fantastic. And we have people of different traditions giving to us. and different backgrounds. And their engagement has been fantastic. And I think in the next week or so, we're going to pay out another huge wad of aid payments. We're just promising that now. And probably in terms of cash received, we'll be close to, if not spot on, what we got in last year. And that's a testament to the faith of the people and their support. I think, to echo what was said earlier, something, I think Jamie said it as well, and something about what people have been through here, cut off from the sacramental life of the church, cut off from being able to gather together, has woken them up to the deprived nature of being deprived of the sacramental life elsewhere, where you can't go to churches, or your church has been blown up, or your priest has been locked up by a particular government. So I think, and people know they're being prayed for, and I think there's a solidarity in faith we've seen. So a big thank you to you all, and even from different traditions, for your extraordinary giving. And one of the things we first did during lockdown was to arrange for 60 religious communities around the world to be praying for everyone, including some praying all night in Ukraine, a community I know there. And that just leads me on briefly to say thank you. I don't want to go on too much, because I think what you've heard is a thank you as well. You know, I want to thank John Mason very much. Remember meeting you years ago, John, and your great support for ACN. Jamie and Lorraine and Claire for all the hard work for the committee you've got going there. For the growth of the work supported by Bishop Joe Toll. I think ACN in Scotland first got going in Motherwell, and it's been marvellous. And the support of Bishop John Keenan has been fantastic. He's on our advisory committee there. And thank you all for your prayers and encouragement. And somebody said along the way, today is also coincidentally the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. I've just received a tweet from a board member saying they decided on Orange Wednesday in Australia because of that. So we'll have to, they meant to have Red Wednesday. We've got to work at that again. So they've gone orange, but we'll work at that. I think it's a nice coincidence, or some people say God incidence, because we're talking about people like Mara Shabazz, and we're talking about, you know, we're talking about other girls who are suffering for their faith. So in particular, and I think ACN, Father Verenfried, the founder, who I knew well, he once said, our charity is telling the story of Christian persecution today as a living eyewitness, and hence with the greatest sympathy. And I remember being just over the border in Lebanon from Syria, meeting some of the refugees. And one story in particular, I think, is a call to us, people who, a family, Randa, Sami, and from Zabadani in Syria, told me how they'd fled their homes when more than 5,000 armed terrorists took over their town in February 2012. And so the Christian houses were marked up, fighting broke out every night, and people were killed in their homes, others kidnapped. And the extremists went from door to door shouting out, "Where are you Christians? And where are you Christians?" And thank God Randa, Sami and their extended family escaped their 10-room house. They had a nice, probably middle-class lifestyle, was absolutely destroyed, razed to the ground. And when I met them, the family was squeezed into a tiny one-room flat with a kitchenette and shower in Zale, provided by the Melkite Archbishop and supported by aid to the church in need. And just the other day, we got an update from Zale that there are still 1,400 hot meals being prepared every day now there for the refugees, many of them Syrian Christian refugees. 400 people in the home because of COVID. They are being provided with food thanks to the work of ACN. But I think that call to us, and other stories, if you think of what happened Easter Sunday in Sri Lanka last year, I don't know how I would have reacted. You know, a bomb goes off. What would I have done in Nigeria when somebody comes and the terrorists come and attack your place, your home, your village, your church? Or in Burkina Faso, what would I have done? And I think that haunting call is to each one of us, certainly to me, where are you Christians? And I can only thank God for the benefactors of aid to the church in need, that they respond to that call that you do. Where are you Christians? We are responding to that call, responding in love and solidarity. So thank you for your prayers, your support for the work of aid to the church in need. There's much more we can do together with other faith communities, with people of different denominations. We're trying to do that the whole time. But thank you above all for standing with Christians and others who suffer for their faith today, and are oppressed, heavily discriminated against, or attacked for witnessing to the love of God today. Thank you.
Thanks, Neville. I think we can all see the passion that you have and other speakers have had tonight for our brothers and sisters who are suffering around the world. So now the next slot I'm handing over to Claire Sweeney. Now she is the ACN Schools and Events Coordinator in Scotland, and she's got the next slot. Claire.
Good evening, and thank you, John. So I'm the Schools and Events Coordinator for ACN in Scotland, and it's my role to reach out to our schools in Scotland, our universities and our parishes, and invite them to engage with the work that we do. We offer assemblies and workshops to our schools throughout Scotland, and we share with them the plight of those persecuted for their faith in our world today. Our skills team have developed a variety of resources, and we continue each month to add to that suite. So please, if we have any teachers with us this evening, I would encourage you to have a look on our website at our skills resources. And for those of us who know teachers, please guide them to our website as well. It'd be great for these resources to get used. I'd like to extend this invitation to engage further with the work of ACN to you tonight, those that have joined us. There are 3 principles which are central to our work: prayer, information, and action. Our first principle is prayer, and we've heard already this evening about the various ways in which, as an organisation, we encourage our benefactors and supporters to pray with us for those who are persecuted throughout our world for their faith. Every day, ACN staff gather in our 23 national offices around the world to do that, to pray for those who are persecuted, those Christians throughout our world persecuted for their faith or who are in pastoral need. And we invite our benefactors through a number of initiatives to join us in that prayer. Our second principle is information. So you've heard a lot of information tonight, and I'm sure it will take us a while to go and digest, which is great. We've got recordings of both of our events. In terms of our funding, over 5,000 projects in more than 140 countries around our world are supported by Aid to the Church in Need. We're constantly carrying out research and investigation into countries where there's known persecution towards Christians and other faith minorities. And you've heard about our reports this evening. Online, you can download various reports from the past, and you can ask for a copy, request that. I've put the link in the chat, so please do have a look and ask for that report. We invite you to get in touch with us and engage in our campaigns and sign up. A way to do that is through our e-news. So again, on our website, please sign up if you are at all interested in what you've heard tonight, and you'll hear more through the e-news. And with this information, as we've already heard this evening, we'd encourage you to share with anyone that will listen the plight of all those who are persecuted for their faith in our world. We can be their voice. That is an action that we can take. And finally, and most importantly, we ask you to take action. You're here tonight and have already taken action in joining us, so thank you for that. A focus of our Red Wednesday campaign this year in particular is that of advocacy, and in particular that action for Myra. We'll hear shortly a video, a message that we've had been sent to us from Myra for this evening's ACN Red Wednesday events, and John will say a bit more about that shortly. But in terms of that practical action that we have for you to take, we'd ask you to sign the petition that we've referenced, this petition that calls on Prime Minister Boris Johnson to grant Myra asylum to the UK. Again, in the chat, I've put that link. You can find it on our website. Please share that petition on social media platforms and email, again, with anyone that will listen and look and sign to add to those 11,000 names that we already have. A letter has also been circulated amongst parliamentarians, again calling on the Prime Minister to grant Myra asylum. So for any parliamentarians or MSPs we have with us this evening, I'd encourage you to sign that letter, get in touch with us. It's available as of tomorrow on our website for you to read. And for those supporters here this evening, we'd encourage you, as you've heard already, please write to your MSPs and MPs asking them to sign this letter, and also for our Scottish MSPs asking them to write themselves to the UK Foreign Secretary and call for the release of those that are unjustly detained in our world. So that just leaves me to finally say thank you for joining us this evening. Without you, our supporters can't provide aid to the church in need. So we're really grateful for that, and we hope that you'll continue with your support in action tonight for us. Thank you.
Hey, John, I think it's over to you now.
I forgot I was meant to actually do the passing back to you, John. So John Pontifex, sorry, if you want to lead us into our video, and I'll play that for you.
Thank you very much, Claire. So Mara Shabazz. Mara was just 14 years of age when she was kidnapped at gunpoint in the streets close to her home in Pakistan's Punjab province. The case, which is very much highlighted in our Sexual Captors 3 report, is one I've been following in the many months that have followed her abduction back at the end of April. She was drugged, she was gang raped and blackmailed. And Mara, who is very much a committed Christian, was forced against her will to convert to Islam and marry her kidnapper. Although she eventually escaped, Mara and her family are in mortal danger, as her former abductor has branded her an apostate because in his mind she has revoked the religion that she has at his request taken up. And that is why the threat of death is so real. I've been in regular, almost daily contact with Mara's solicitor, Samira Shafiq, and it's Samira Shafiq who told me at the weekend that this case for Mara's marriage to be annulled, her conversion to Islam to be revoked, that in fact is something that is not first and foremost in the mind of her abductor to somehow stop from happening. She said in her words that her abductor would rather her dead than win the case and remain married to Mara. In a moment, of course, we will hear Mara's statement, especially recorded for today, Red Wednesday, and we need to thank very urgently Bishop Iftikhar Indrias, who provided this video for us from the New Covenant School system. But before that, we'll hear from Sajid Christopher, who's very much a close contact of Aid to the Church in Eden and runs a human rights organization in Pakistan. And he will explain a little bit more about Mara's case before we hear from Mara herself. So over to you, Claire, for the video.
Mr. Chishti, Mr. Kent-Smith, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this parliamentary event in the UK. My name is Sajid Christopher, President of the Human Friends Organization, which engaged Samira Shafiq, the lawyer in the case of Myra Shabazz. Aged just 14, Myra was abducted at gunpoint close to her home in Medina town near Faisalabad. She was then drugged, gang raped at gunpoint, and a video was recorded. Her abductor blackmailed Myra by threatening her to release the video. He threatened to kill her and her family. He brought her silence. Her abductor forced her to marry him and convert to Islam, all against her will. When Myra's parents tried to get her back, the Lahore High Court astonishingly ruled in the abductor's favor. Myra is a brave girl. She managed to escape from the custody of the abductor after the 2 weeks of the Lahore High Court's decision. She ran away from her abductor and told her story to the police. But although she has escaped from her tormentor, Myra is still not safe. Quite the opposite, her abductor now accuses her of apostasy and has threatened to kill her. The threat of a so-called honor killing is a very serious concern. She is fighting in the courts to get her marriage annulled, but the threats grow as she tries to return to the Christian religion she was forced to renounce. Myra is in hiding. Her neighbors have reported how suspiciously people have been going house to house asking for her. Myra and her family are in grave danger. Their only hope is a new life in a new country. That is the only way to guarantee her safety and her family's safety. I am grateful to aid to the Church in Need for spearheading a campaign for Myra and her family to be given asylum in the UK. This is the great hope which Myra and her family seek. As president of the Human Friends Organization, working closely with Sumaira, the lawyer of Myra Shahbaz, I ask that the UK grants this request for asylum. Her life and that of her family depend on it. Thank you.
मेरा नाम मायरा है। अब मैं आपके सामने खुदा का जिंदा पाक कलाम पढ़ूंगी। ज़बूर 82 उसकी 3री और 4थी आयत। गरीब और यतीम का इंसाफ करो, गमज़दा और मुफलिस के साथ इंसाफ से पेश आओ, गरीब और मोहताज को बचाओ, शरीरों के हाथ से उनको छुड़ाओ। पाक कलाम का पढ़ा और सुना जाना हम सब के लिए बाइस बरकत हो। खुदा का शुक्र। आमीन। मेरा नाम मायरा है। 6 माह पहले मुझे अगवा किया गया था, जबरदस्ती मेरे साथ निकाह करवाया गया, जबरदस्ती इस्लाम कबूल करवाया गया, जबरदस्ती मुझे ब्लैकमेल किया गया, मुझे टॉर्चर किया गया और मेरे पे जबरदस्ती तशद्दुद किया। मुझे धमकियाँ दी जा रही थी, मुझे कमरे में बंद किया गया और मुझे धमकियाँ इस चीज़ की दी गई थी कि अगर तुमने हमारे हक में बयान ना दिया तो हम तुम्हारी फैमिली को कत्ल कर देंगे। मैं शुक्रगुजार हूँ बिशप इफ्तिखार रियाज की, उनके चर्च की, जिन्होंने मेरी बाजियाबी के लिए दुआ भी की और मुझे बाजियाब भी करवाया। मैं शुक्रगुजार हूँ इंटरनेशनल चर्च की और क्रिश्चियन कम्युनिटी की, जिन्होंने मेरी बाजियाबी के लिए दुआ की। पाकिस्तान में मुझे और मेरी फैमिली को बहुत ज़्यादा खतरा है और मुझे और मेरी फैमिली को बहुत ज़्यादा धमकियाँ लगाई जा रही हैं और मेरी फैमिली और मैं बहुत ज़्यादा खौफ ज़दा है। अब मैं दुआ करूँगी फरश शहीद हुमायूनस और आरज़ू राजा के लिए जो इस वक्त मुश्किल से गुजर रही है। कुदूस कुदूस जिंदा रश्कों के खुदा बनवर के खालिक और मालिक तेरा शुक्र दे, तेरी तमजीद करते हैं। तुझे था, तुझे है, तुझे आने वाला है, तू भला है, तेरी शफ़क़त दी है, तेरा प्यार निराला है, तेरी वफादारी पुश्ता पुशती। अपने खुदावंद दुआ मांगते तेरी क्रिश्चियन कम्युनिटी के लिए, मेरा खुदावंद अपना दाहिना हाथ बढ़ाए रखना तेरी कलीसिया जहाँ जहाँ भी है मेरे खुदावंदा ने छूना, बड़ी बरकत देना मेरे खुदावंदा। दुआ मांगते क्रिश्चियन कम्युनिटी की बच्चियों के लिए मेरे खुदावंदा, अपना दाहिना हाथ बढ़ा के उन्हें सेव करना है मेरे खुदावंदा, अपने परों में छुपाना, अपना दाहिना हाथ बढ़ाना है मेरे खुदावंदा। दुआ मांगती हूँ यूनिस के लिए, आज दुराजा के लिए, फराज शाहीन के लिए, इस वक्त जो भी मुश्किल में मुब्तला है मेरे खुदावंदा, अपने दाहिने हाथ को बढ़ा के शैतान के बंधन को तोड़ के अगर खुदावंदा ने आजाद कर, तू हर एक काम करने की कुदरत रखता है मेरे खुदावंदा। दुआ मांगती हूँ बिशप इफ्तिखार, उनकी टीम के लिए, उनके चर्च के लिए, उनकी फैमिली के लिए, कि खुदावंद ने बड़ी बरकत दे, हर बरकत से नवाजा मेरे खुदावंदा। मेरे खुदावंदा इन तीनों बेटियों की फैमिली के लिए दुआ मांगती मेरे खुदावंदा, इन्हें हौसला तसल्ली देना मेरे खुदावंदा, इन्हें बड़ी बरकत देना मांगती तेरे मीठे रब से इल्जाम से।
We are deeply grateful to Mara for having the courage to speak to us about her experiences, her faith, her courage, her determination to tell her story and rebuild her life are, I'm sure you'll agree, an inspiration to us all. As Claire has said, Aid to the Church in Need is calling on Prime Minister Boris Johnson to grant Mara and her family asylum in the UK. A huge thank you to all those who have supported the Aid to the Church in Need petition to bring about this asylum. And we've now got more than 11,300 signatures. For all those of you who've signed this petition, a huge thank you. But for those of you who haven't, and for those really anxious to ask others to sign it, please do act. We know that if the UK doesn't act swiftly in this case, it could have fatal consequences. So please do sign the petition. You can find it on acnuk.org/petition. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John, for that, and thank you for the video. And we're just coming towards the end of our evening now, so thank you for everybody who's been here for the whole time. Can I just thank my colleague Claire Adamson, particularly the other MSP who's there. And although it is mainly a Westminster and a reserved issue, I think it is worth writing to your MSPs to say that you're concerned about this. Scotland has links particularly with 4 countries, 3 of which are in Africa, but the other one is Pakistan, that we try and have international input with. So that does mean there's a link directly between Scotland and Pakistan. And therefore, I do think it's worthwhile writing to your MSPs, and then we can also raise issues with the Westminster government and directly. As I said, recently we're in the process of writing the cross-party group to the Indian consulate and about the treatment of Christians and other minority groups there. So, I mean, I just think this has been a tremendous evening again. It's been online. Obviously, we'd all like to be together, and I'm sure hopefully that will happen next year. But I hope you've been inspired by what you've heard, by the ideas of writing to governments, to MSPs, to MPs, all of these things. I mean, I think one of the things that strikes me is we are in a long line. I mean, there is a spiritual battle going on. The Bible is quite clear about that. And when we look in the scriptures, we see people like Esther, and she didn't have an easy time. She had to put her life on the line for her faith. And we see people like Daniel, who didn't have an easy time. And as we all know, he got thrown in with the lions. So we should perhaps not be surprised as God's people in the world that there is resistance to that. Governments do not like other people having authority, and they do not like us having allegiance to other authorities. But I think we can be encouraged because God brought Esther through and God brought Daniel through, and we want to pray for Myra and others. And we can't help everybody, but we can help a few people and we can pray for them. So I'd just like to finish in prayer, and then that'll be us finished. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this evening and all the tremendous amount of information and work that has gone into sharing all of these things with us. And we want to pray for our brothers and sisters, and especially for our sister Myra in Pakistan and her family and others like that, who are just being so mistreated, not directly by the government, by the majority population and with the support to some extent of the government. So I do pray for your blessing on the work of Aid to the Church in Need, and that